That's our notice. We're live.
Yeah.
Thanks to everyone who's being really punctual. We're waiting for people to come in. The Eventbrite notice goes out just about now. So we'll wait a few minutes before getting started.
Scott's joining. Hello. We're just going to wait a few more minutes for people to join. Thanks for joining, Scott, and everybody.
Nice to see you, Scott.
You too. How you doing?
All well.
How are you, Luma? Where in the world are you?
Amsterdam.
Still in Amsterdam. Okay.
Yeah.
And Michelle, are you in Portugal yet?
Back in Amsterdam. I'm off on Saturday. So I'm still in Sao Paulo for a couple more hours. And then I'm packing up and taking off.
How long are you going to be? Or planning to go?
It's indefinite. It's indefinite. The Portuguese stay will be as long as it's interesting.
Cool. Where are you starting in Lisbon?
Yeah, we're flying in via Lisbon and staying in nearby for a month on the coast in Estoril, and then but home properly will be up in Porto.
Good plan.
Well, you're all invited to visit.
I'll take you up.
So quite a few people have showed up. I think this is a good opportunity to do an intro and to roll off the conversation. What do you think, Luma?
Yeah, let's do it. Do you want to start us off?
So this is our fifth or sixth meeting in the Technology and Culture series, which began technically at the end of 2020, but then ran throughout 2021. We did a handful of sessions, and these are open conversations. We pick a theme within the context of technology, of the intersection of technology and culture, and we discuss that theme openly without much structure or script. Luma, do you want to say a few words about today's theme?
Yeah, so today's theme is community, and our last session last month was all about individuality. So it was only telling that we, jump right into community as the kind of duality or the polar opposite of individuality. And what really came out of that conversation was that, the impact of technology and facilitating individualism has both, of course, positive and negative outcomes. It creates these beautiful spaces where we can explore different parts of ourselves and maybe step into kind of more authentic versions of who we could be and find community through that. but it's also being manipulated and potentially detrimental to our well-being, to human well-being. And the question that we kind of left last session with is, is this duality of the kind of individuality and tech and individuality just part of techno evolution, and what does it mean about the future of community, which is what we would love to explore with everyone today, just to kind of frame our conversations. These aren't knowledge sharing conversations. They're just really meant for everyone to bring their own insights and exploration so that we can learn and grow together. So really thinking about how the different perspectives of each of us and how we think about, even our previous theme, individuality and community, and how that melds into a future possibility is what we'd love to learn more about. And I would love to just start, maybe I was thinking before we started, the idea of community has been shifting so much. And when we think about culture is a version of community. It's kind of how we make sense of our interactions and our engagements. So when we talk about the intersection of tech and culture, where do you find community these days? I'm just kind of leaving that question out for everyone to start the conversation. And of course, you can participate in the chat as well, or we love to see your faces. So do turn on and share as well.
I can get the conversation rolling by saying that I've been trying to build communities online since I've been online, basically, starting with IRC and sort of setting up channels or servers and sort of trying to find people who think like me. And so I think it's an integral part. It's an integral part of doing anything online is finding out the people whom it resonates with. And I think one of the beautiful things about community is that it can be tiny and quiet and still be very, very powerful. And I think the technology really facilitates that. Yes, go ahead.
So as you'd developed the envisioning community, in particular Slack group, and managed to get particular traction, what have you found as particularly useful as a way to allow kind of that individual as well as kind of collective unison around? Is it on a thematical basis? What are the kind of success factors that lead to a more successful community build and development and grow? Because that's beyond just the initial spike of interest, but to sustain that kind of ongoing dialogue, to have a much richer conversation.
I think having like a platform or a stage for people to show their own work, ideas, or thoughts has been probably the driving aspect, both within envisioning and other things that I've tried personally. So be it through what Carol and I do with sort of asking questions every week, where those with whom on the envisioning Slack specifically, and then seeing with whom that question resonates and who wants to sort of chime in with their answer. That type of engagement, I think, is like you can do so much more than that. But getting people to sort of show their colors, I think that's how you gain sort of both the confidence and the insight from participants in sort of in a relevant way. Because if you're just broadcasting ideas or messages or blog posts, then it's not really community. Then it's just a PR channel. Whereas I think anything that sort of engages is key. Carol, do you agree?
Yes. I've been thinking about online communities, because what I feel about what I feel in relation to physical communities is that similarly to what Luma just said, talking about culture, is that physical communities, they form this intimacy by just being physically together. Like with neighbors, for instance, you basically just see them around a lot. They are not interacting with you, but they're just there, and we are kind of sharing space, and this creates an intimacy. But with online communities, we need to interact, we need to engage. And I'm wondering how to create this intimacy in ways that are not through engagement, like typing, or maybe VR will help with this, because VR has this physicality to it. So just putting some thoughts out there. I don't have the answer, but
Can I also ask another question? Sorry to just be annoying, but you know, there's been attempts by some organisations to put some, I guess, structure around kind of the build of kind of collective intelligence. So, you know, Nesta worked on a particular playbook. It's actually an analog playbook for a digital world, but that's very basic in terms of design thinking principles in it. You know, are there other playbooks to kind of around community building that you have seen that exist to say this is what kind of are exemplars or particular models, and who's doing that type of analysis to assess which are the kind of fundamental ingredients of successful community building, first and foremost, and then looking at it beyond, you know, once you go out certain geographies or cross sectors, or and how that is the complexities around the design. I just wondered to what extent there is, you know, road mapping that would be helpful to be consulted on, that people can start to think about how best to do this, because I haven't seen it, but I may well be missing it.
I think people are still just trying to figure it out. There's a lot being kind of explored in different ways, from social platforms to what you're talking about, Scott, where it's more collective intelligence and corporate community building. There's a lot of different kind of approaches to it, as well as different intentions as to why. Because when you're talking about collective intelligence, it's less about actually nurturing a community, and it's more about gaining insights for you know, probably a profit driven purpose. I think what's interesting is that in the past few years, so much has changed in terms of how we engage, from what Caroline is talking about, from, you know, the shifting from physical experiences to digital experiences, and that lack of intimacy is really really a challenge for community building, and how we cultivate that type of intimacy for community is really still just a big question. I think what we're seeing in terms of trends is communities that, you know, can be built through anonymity, which is exciting, but also really scary, because you're not necessarily able to engage or kind of trust who you're engaging with, and which begs the question: do you need to trust who you're engaging with, especially when you have the kind of separation of the digital sphere to protect you? But I guess that's kind of on a tangent, Scott. In terms of your question, are there any kind of best practice playbooks? I haven't seen any myself. I think the challenge is, how do we translate our physical communities online?
I think it's one of those irreducible things that you just have to build it up from scratch. We can learn from others to some extent, especially tactics, but like strategy, I think it's at least I haven't seen anything like it. I mean, I've seen a bunch of threads on like Twitter explaining like premises for getting more engagement, say, with an online community, and a few of those things really check out, such as on Slack, like having a limited amount of channels. Like, but those are all, they're always going to be tactics. At least strategy-wise, you just have to connect with people who resonate with your ideas. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think, isn't it true that, you know, and again, I'll shut up after this question, but, you know, I think you could probably set down some general principles, as well as kind of, you know, some tactical or strategic activities that are broadly applicable. And then obviously everything is actually, it's bespoke. It depends on you know, building out both the physical and ideally the digital together. You know, these types of things whereby, you know, some general rules around how one can not only set up but then, you know, service and maintain so that kind of community kind of subsists. I'm curious because I haven't seen anything, but I think it's something which I think would be valuable. But I don't know, maybe I think asking the community whether other people were aware of the existence of some pockets of knowledge, whether it's been brought together in certain ways. But I say I haven't seen it, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Lucy, I see you unmuted yourself earlier. Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry, I have corona, so I'm a little bit dizzy. Thanks for offering this conversation. I missed the previous one, but yeah, happy to be here today. What I've been thinking about is, and I come from a very different area because I'm not in the tech industry, but I work a lot with communities on the ground with the sense of community that are engaging in any civic issue at the city level. And what I've been asking myself now while you were talking is, what is the purpose of the community? I mean, is there a clear purpose? Because this is like, for me, the first thing to be asked about. So what do we expect? And how is this, how is the people engaging in the community feel themselves? So what is the role that they see for themselves in the community? And I think, I mean, this is physical communities, right? And this is already then some differentiation to whatever can happen then in a virtual setting. But I think for me, it's always important to have this clarity about what is expected and how then people can then be engaged, and also knowing that there perhaps will be different roles and different expectations then towards the community members. And I don't know, what is the purpose that you see, or what kind of purpose are you talking about when you're talking about your communities?
I also wonder the same thing. Yeah, because when Scott uses words like successful community, I was just thinking that really depends on the purpose of each community and if they have a purpose at all, because sometimes, I don't know, I feel that these words are really starting to pop up when we talk about community building in the digital sphere. So I don't see this.
I mean, the two things, sorry, I'm interrupted, sorry. I mean, the two things which I'm currently working on, which is kind of why I'm asking. One is, sharing some research, which ultimately is around how do you bring principles around data collaboration? So how do you get people working open source around certain things whereby there is a purpose to it, whereby academics can come together, ideally try and contribute. There are two examples I've seen done by YouGov, which are really, really good around how do you set out rules around understanding supply, demand, governance frameworks, all those types of things to ensure that when you do share data, you're doing so in a thoughtful way, and so the management of that process can be as successful as possible. So that's number one, and I should put in the chat some links around that, because they've been really smart in the way they've really, really thought it through, and they've got a ton of different examples about what's worked, what hasn't, etc., etc. But that's in particular around data sharing, which has its own obvious complications because of the nature of data. And the second is a more general effort around trying to understand efforts to link organizations across an ecosystem, where in particular the territory is looking at Africa, where you have different either investors or founders or ecosystem actors kind of coming together. There's a paucity of knowledge in areas. There's a lot of scope for greater purposeful, intentional collaboration, rather than this kind of quite siloed approach where things are much more around there are initiatives, but they are more hit and hope, as opposed to and it's organic as opposed to kind of much more open and structured. So what is that kind of, how do you structure bottom-up efforts around collaboration that then allows a diffusion and a deployment of knowledge that helps people find one another, connect for the right reasons at the right time, so you get towards some level of traction over a number of particular thematical areas. So that's why my interest is around kind of, the development of communities. I'm not sure how to do it, but I've seen the work, obviously, that Michelle has done around the envisioning platform, and it's fantastic, because people are active on the platform, and it's a good example. But I haven't seen loads of good examples, so I'm very curious about how do you translate that into the digital sphere. And I say examples of good practice are particularly interesting. To get some level of understanding about what is working, and also more importantly what isn't working, because that's also important.
I wonder if there can't be kind of like a broad line kind of direction or way of doing it. I think, already I feel like we're talking about many different types of communities, ones that are, driven by work or kind of like needing to build an ecosystem, whether it's research or knowledge based, and also hobbies or interest based communities. And even beyond that, just communities of people who want to feel supported by other people that might be a little bit of interest based, but not necessarily, because a lot of the times what you're seeing in the digital world are people actually joining communities just to find that sense of community without necessarily originally being interested in that hobby or topic or movement even. So I think it's a lot more nuanced than, are there just best practices for community building online? And I think the key or the best way to answer your question, Scott, is what need are you fulfilling, right? Because any community or any kind of group or organization success is going to be based on a need being fulfilled that will congregate people around that. And we see that working both in positive and negative ways, and really highlighting key challenges that society is facing by doing so. So I think it's a lot bigger than that. And I think what we're seeing with tech is how it's really redefining the opportunities of how we build community. But it won't necessarily solve for whether the community is successful or not. That needs to come from the community itself and cultivating, or fulfilling a need.
I would raise the question. I would ask sort of who's managed communities, who among us here have been involved, and Lucy, do you have any experience of how technology changes that? Especially, you mentioned sort of communities on the ground or physical in person.
So I agree with what Luma said. I think for every member, especially for what we like to call for the core team of a community, this purpose has to be very clear, and it has to be aligned with certain, perhaps activities that are work related, or that there's like people can spend time in the community and really like have the effort for doing this. It has to have a purpose for the person itself. So also, what is in for me, right? Being part of a community just for, it depends. I think there are different people out there, but the communities I know, people really have to have this clear purpose, but they also need to feel needed in the community and understand also what's in the community for them as well. So it's a bit this it's different interfaces. And I think what I have experienced in online settings is that since the pandemic, especially, also there is just a fatigue of online kind of formats, and I was looking at the company where I work or offer most of my services, and they have created also different kinds of online communities that are like trying to be similar to Facebook or something like that, and it's too much. And then people just say, okay, I'm not going to go to any other thing because I have to like remember 10 passwords, and everything is just similar but different, and then I have to remember, and then they're starting to become fatigued about the amount of different platforms. So I think I would recommend all the time for people to see, okay, do you really need to program something new, or can you make use of something that is out there already? And yeah, not to overburn. And I think the clear purpose and also the clear understanding of who are your users, what are users looking for, and how do they think, how do they create content, how do they search content, I think is very important things. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think what you shared, Lucy, is what Augusto is also asking about, like, how do you even manage the channels, right, from the other side? So it's one thing to also be burnt out from not knowing where to go, because you have to look at all these different platforms, but it's another thing to have to like build or offer those platforms to make sure that you get the diversity that you need to fulfill that community intention that you might have, because some people are in Discord and some people are not, and on Slack, and some people are on WhatsApp and others are on Telegram or even Signal. So how do you even start to choose how you're going to enable your community from a tech perspective is part of the challenge. And yeah, Augusto says that they are trying to use each channel for a specific purpose, which is an interesting approach. Yeah, and for different people, different tools are more appealing than others, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. That's why there is that there are these different platforms. I'd be curious to know. And kind of going back to the original question, like, what communities do you feel you're a part of? I know, Michelle, you talked about you've always been looking to build community online, but where is everyone kind of attracted to the most? Where do you feel like you're part of a successful community? I think that's already a great stepping stone in understanding a little bit better of what works.
Well, I'll mention a non-virtual community, which Scott, Luma, and I are part of, which is called Think, which is a school of creative leadership that really emphasizes the community aspect as well. And we've been part of that for the better part of the last decade. And they, despite sort of challenges with COVID, I think they've managed to keep relevant and sort of strengthen the community bonds. And it's something that I haven't really experienced physically anywhere else. I'm personally drawn to virtual communities because sort of never been too attached to the physical place I'm living in for family reasons and third culture kid aspects. So online always felt more natural, but I think the only physical community that really resonates with me would be Think.
And I just to add, I mean, with respect to the Think community, it is obviously people who've kind of come into it, run it, and been a part of a program. So there's kind of like there's some spiritual affinity. But beyond that, what's really interesting is it is unsuccessful in its attempts to get people working online through the Slack channel. Yes, there's pockets of kind of newsletters and things like that, but generally it's quite it's very thin participation, and it has not engaged digital tools, yet still the community it resonates and is strong. Is that because there was a physical connection and you spent time and built up human connection with those people? Undoubtedly, no doubt about it. But it has not translated across into digital, and that you can argue it actually makes the you can in some ways say, well, it hasn't been enhanced, but actually in some ways you still feel part of it. So it's kind of it's a bit of an odd one in terms of what you thought would be solidified hasn't been, and it hasn't been necessary, which is peculiar because it still subsists, and we're still part of something which we feel embraces some values and other things which we align or attribute to or want to attribute ourselves to. So it's a very unique type of community that is a bit of an outlier, I think. In particular, the fact it's been reasonably unsuccessful with its kind of digital translation.
And it goes back to what you were saying, Carol, about how, part of the challenge with online or digital communities is that it lacks the intimacy that you cultivate in physical communities. And I think that's what Think has offered for its community. And, you see so many different platforms, even technology tools like actual devices, hardware, trying to create that intimacy. And yeah, still not something that has completely been successful. And what is that to say, especially after a few years where we were really forced to be online, and then the repercussions is that everyone is burnt out from being online so much.
I mean, I just wonder how many different WhatsApp community groups are you part of, and how many of those are on mute and you really don't pay much attention to? How many are, how many Slack chat, different kind of organizations are you part of, and which ones kind of you lean in and out of? Some much more than others, I imagine. But that's generally, people using Facebook and things like that a lot less. LinkedIn and other things where people do feel kind of, it's a different type of community, of course, but it's still a level of buying into or actively participating within a community in the digital realm. Personally, I try to. I'm not that involved. There's only so much time one can have, but some people spend a lot of time in these things.
Yeah, I think personally, I hate that I have to be a part of so many WhatsApp groups, but it's a hard fight, because I've tried to convert people to other platforms and they just refuse because it's easier. And so where's the responsibility that comes with community, which is interesting. One community that I did really enjoy engaging in digitally, and I didn't do it this year because they're also more physical this year, but was South by Southwest. They did it really well last year. It was really interesting to be able to, they built their own platform to engage with a like-minded, or at least a similarly curious community for a period of time. It didn't last longer, at least not for me. Maybe others continued in the community, but I thought it was a very interesting approach to cultivating community online. But the success of it, of course, is, and not necessarily a previous or precedental physical experience, because I've never actually attended the conference, but at least a reputation for that intimacy that it creates.
Lou, let me ask you a question. So Soho House and that app, basically there's a kind of community, there's a physical membership group, there's a physical place to go. Yeah, there are tons of events that kind of pop up. Again, it's kind of an example where you think that community would be quite active. Personally, I've never even logged onto the app, so I don't know. But other people. So is that where you have a kind of physical space potentially, plus the kind of virtual other things that you do around a kind of people who are like-minded, potentially interested in those types of things. But I have no idea about what type of traction it has got. I just wonder what was your experiences of somewhere which has that kind of physical and digital presence, and whether they're doing things which are right or wrong.
I haven't experienced any community incentive from their digital experience. Yeah. It's mainly, I think, for advertising or communicating events and programs online.
There's a fine line between those.
Yeah.
I just want to add, there's a fine line, like as someone who's in the position of sometimes having to announce things and other times wanting to engage in conversation within our own community. It's really tricky that, like, how do you, like, striking that tone of voice? Like, you have to give as much as you ask for, in a way. And I think that's what it often comes down to. Places that call themselves communities that don't really give, that are sort of using it as an excuse to do affordable tech support, come to mind. You can discuss things amongst each other, but don't ask us for anything. That's not a community. Lucy, you
Yeah.
wanted to ask something or add something? Yeah.
I just wanted to tell the story. I'm part of so many communities, and then I don't know where to start, but just to start with the most recent I joined, which is a community of researchers and activists on the degrowth movement. And it's quite interesting to observe how it goes, just from a bird's perspective, and they're doing it really like very low profile on what it comes to the tech platforms they're using. So there is a mailing list, and then people can send something in their mailing list regarding just sharing about the events or something like that. They said we don't want Slack because we don't like it, and somehow they didn't want to go for that. And what we agreed, and what seemed to be a success factor for the community, was for people to try to find the subtopics which they are interested, and have conversations that are more intimate, so that they can have the asynchronous part where there is a work in a joint document, just like a very basic cloud document, and everybody can access it and work on it, but also that people meet, and that they take time to get together and understand what they're doing and what they are working on, and what are the synergies, or what could be interesting things that they could work on together. And that the purpose is also that every 2 months there is a meeting, and that everybody comes in this meeting. So synchronous and asynchronous work, and really having the time for people to join and come and talk and see each other, and go into different breakout rooms, and like really just what you would do in a normal setting, in a physical or like face-to-face setting, but just online. And it's important to take the time for people really like to come and join and have conversations and have something to do jointly together. So each meeting should be prepared by one of the groups that try to find themselves self-organized, and there is an input from them, from the group, and then everybody discusses. And I think this is quite important, that in the beginning everybody agreed what they wanted and how it would be the lowest like threshold for work for everybody, but still like being able to build smaller communities and people to get more intimate and learn each other, and work on something jointly as an output. And I think this is a good experience, and I think it's working fine for now. I mean, it's just started, but it's really like getting together and doing what we agreed to do in the beginning.
I think another thing that's really interesting to observe from a tech perspective is, cultures that don't necessarily have this public culture of community. Their communities are much more behind, family circles, and not really open to general public. And seeing what happens in those spaces, like for example, in Saudi, Twitter is huge. I think Twitter might not talk about it, but they're still around because of the culture in Saudi Arabia. Like that's just the reality of it. It's their number one market, and that ability for technology to enable community expansion and what impact it has on those cultures is something really interesting to watch. I think, Mariam, I saw you raise your hand. Even Pakistan, you say, yeah.
Yeah. So with the Saudi Arabia point that you made, even in Pakistan, we're catching up with the communities and bringing our community online, because this is something new since COVID. We are more and more hybrid, and we are using our people and their skills and talents to bring the questions that matter to our community. But I think what we have done is that we have made the communities, but we have not been channelizing that in a way that technology has overtaken us more, because we are more connected, but we have suffered the hydro connectivity, in which it's hyperly connected. So I think where the technology comes to save the day, we have also lagged behind in our human interactions, because we're all the time online now due to the COVID, and we are slowly trying to acknowledge that that our presence is important online, but we have to like take a step back and see how many relationships we have cultivated, even for professional networking, even for our community, and even for the work we are doing. So I think there's this lag here, and in Pakistan, we're catching up in that. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I also think about some of the work I've done in Africa and the challenges around tech engagement and how it impacts the community there. So while it really enables them in terms of facilitating, for example, online payment, you know, just by bypassing everything and going to SMS payments, from a community aspect, there's still a very cultural sensitivity to engaging online. You don't turn your video on. There's always connectivity challenges. So community is still a very physical experience in Africa. And there's not even necessarily an interest in building or cultivating those type of communities. And what we see with a lot of these global initiatives for community is that there are certain cultures or certain geographical spaces that don't engage well because we're not recognizing the cultural nuance of those cultures and how what community means to them. I wonder if anyone else has had an experience like that. Like, what is it like in Brazil? Maybe it's more unique as well.
I think people here are very quick at picking up on new platforms. I don't know, Carol, what's the, yeah. They're sort of keen on trying. I mean, Orkut, you talk about Twitter having a success story in Saudi. I think Orkut was a success story in part because of the uptake here in Brazil many years ago, and it hasn't really it hasn't slowed down. I think the social media adoption here is always significant, which also means people try doing everything on Facebook and WhatsApp, which can be very disorganized and scattered.
Everything. The other day I was in a restaurant and I had to send the order through WhatsApp and I was physically there. So yeah.
Augusto was asking earlier about metaverse platforms. I just wanted to add that sort of as a response to that, I think the distinction between what you would consider a metaverse platform as opposed to a non-metaverse platform is very thin, as in like Telegram or Discord for that matter, or even us here on Zoom there's the distinction between this and say Facebook Horizon Worlds or something is sort of the immersive aspect of VR. And I think if you need that to build community, it's probably going to be very limiting. I get a sense, I mean, games are one thing where you sort of hang out for hours and hours, but it's really difficult to spend hours and hours within VR with sort of the current state of the art, goggles and gadgets. You'll spend like a day, like an hour or two a day is a lot, unless you're working in the field. So I think there's always going to be sort of a multi-platform approach to that. I think doing an event in some sort of alt space setup is one thing that could probably be done very well, but you need something that people can check in on, I don't know, before going to bed, that doesn't require them to sort of don a whole setup to interact. Yeah, something like Gather Town. Yeah.
Even time feels different when we are right now, for instance, talking through video. If someone asks a question and I just need some time to think about, to digest this question, the silence that forms in the room is already too much. So we must react so fast that, I don't know, I was just thinking how this affects our relationship and how we interact with each other online.
Yeah, the fact that our community engagements are no longer time specific? Is that what you're saying? Because we're all in different time zones, we're all having different time experiences.
No, I was more thinking about right now, we cannot leave some emptiness in the room. So if someone asks a question and we all have to think about and digest this question, it kind of creates a weird vibe in the environment where we have to fill the space super fast. And this kind of, I don't know how it interacts the way we understand time, space, and build relationships with each other. Does it make sense?
Leaving silences in the conversation is not comfortable, I think, online. Maybe that's what you're trying to say. Yeah, that silences, I think, has become uncomforting because it's online and it has a time limit, and then we are not in person in different time zones. So maybe that is why there is that gap.
Maria, I'm checking out this Empire of Ash on Discord. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah. So I joined Discord community for the NFTs, where they're building this story building on NFTs called Empire of Ash. So yeah, this is that. I just joined it as a member, but it's run by two people who have this whole NFTs enthusiastic characterization and stories where they're building up. So this is something that was my experience of how Discord works and how these communities that are building on NFTs and their stories and worlds is happening. So they're mostly online. Some are online from different time zones, and some are working and then they're managing these communities. And I think it takes time to do that. And it's a different world out there, I think, with the NFTs out there and the metaverses. So it's still learning how they do that.
Yeah, and being attracted to the trends is a form of community building as well. I in our last session, when we were talking about kind of the role of culture and individuality, it came up that, you know, culture is really, it provides you with a set of tools for how to behave and how to interact with each other. And community is a representation of that. And so all social technologies are cultural tools, right? So even these games or even NFTs become these social tools, even if we don't necessarily perceive them as such, or they don't perceive themselves as such. So if we do want to create community, we need to create rituals or ways of expressing that engagement or that ritual. So I wonder if that's where we're falling short in a lot of our community building initiatives, is that there's less ritual involved in it. So how do you get people to practice ritual in that engagement? Just a thought. What are healthy rituals that technologies can focus on? And to your point, Scott, like this idea that you haven't seen anything that's successful out there, part of it is because there's a lot of doing and very little meaning, right? So if there's ways to create more meaning in the interaction rather than just we're going to share knowledge, or we're just going to share ideas, or we're going to share papers or research or all of that, where's the ritual in it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the ritual is again, I mean, I think there's even going beyond that. I think there's more the fundamental issues around basically the communities are very, very, they're so easy to join and so easy to fall out of, and to keep attention and maintain yourself within a community when you've got, you know, such limited amount of access to so little time, and often these are free, and so basically, you know how if you are part of something which you're paying for, is that your incentive changes, number one. Two, I think you look at some examples like Clubhouse and others where they kept the scarcity principle, and that kept people interested because they want to be part of something which basically they weren't a member of, and then basically it generated an extra interest. And once it got going and everyone part of it, and then no one used it. I don't think any, but ultimately there was this kind of anticipation around wanting to be part of a community. So what are the signals are kind of getting people involved, and how do you then keep people involved? And I think ritual, I agree with you. I think that it's something which is because I guess the rules of engagement are so unclear and not formalized, and it's so easy to dip in and out of, then you'll end up with low levels of engagement participation, generally quite thin level of interaction typically, and lots of participation rather than richer, deep participation. And what are we seeking? You want to be part of lots of different things to keep your eyes and go wide, or more narrow and richer in the types of relationships and communities that you seek, and for what purpose. So I think it depends on what one is seeking, and how one participates in different types of communities in order to get whatever there is that one else wants out of it, as it were.
Michelle, this Friends with Benefits thing is so cool. I didn't know about it. Very interesting.
I don't know if it's cool or just appealing, or appearing to be cool, or playing like it's really cool. But again, I have no idea. I can't judge because I've never seen it up close. But it's one of those places that have really pulled off aligning the incentives between the members. So everyone has to literally buy some crypto to join their tokens to join the group. So of course there's an incentive to keep growing it. I still sort of fundamentally believe all crypto is a pyramid scheme. So I don't see that working outside of that principle. It's like in the sense of sort of the greater fool theory, that someone's going to buy your tokens for more money than you paid at some point in the future. That's always going to be a big driver of platforms like that. Which doesn't at all affect the social aspects of it. But I do wonder what happens if you remove that.
I have been seeing
and Maria,
growing on Discord, and they are all very similar. They call themselves DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, but actually they are just Discord channels, and you have to buy in tokens to be a part of it.
Hi, Lucy.
And Miriam brought up Clubhouse, which I totally forgot about. That was definitely the ultimate community digital experiment. Is it still around? Is anyone still engaging with it?
Yeah. It's still around. They have introduced new features where we can share the rooms when it is live, and the rooms can have clips like YouTube Shorts.
We've lost her for a minute.
Seems to be local.
And what's interesting with that is because
direct message inboxes now, and
Mariam, we lost you for the last minute.
Yeah.
If you want to summarize what you just said, we just lost you and I came back.
I think we lost her again. I think what's really interesting there is that I'm sure there are different, again, geographic locations that might lean in towards tools like Clubhouse, while others not so much for different reasons as well. And it's interesting to see that and understand that there are different tools for different places as well, and different cultures.
And also different times. I think Clubhouse, part of the reason Clubhouse exploded was because of the sort of first winter in
COVID, yeah.
of COVID in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah, and that
which is-
maybe now it's still really relevant in places that are still, negotiating that public life again or not.
Yeah,
And I
sorry,
guess
my
that-
net got disconnected. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Would you like to summarize what you were saying?
Yeah, sure. I was saying that it's still out there because they have introduced different features for it. Like whenever there's a room online and people are engaging with it, you can share the room with the community on the Clubhouse app, and then you can cut some clips that resonated with you, and then they have reduced DM to bring the chat rooms inside. It's like bringing all the 90s hip culture back, like MIRC, but you're interacting with the real people right now, with the communities. There's a chat room, then there's a DM option, and then you can privately message someone. And it's more like they have made it one on one also, but it's like happening live there. So they have introduced that. So it's experimental, I guess.
Yeah, and I'd be curious, like, do you spend time on it? How much time do you spend on it?
I only spend when there's no other things that are happening online. So I just go there and see how many rooms are happening live. And then for half an hour, 40 minutes, I check 2, 3 rooms, what conversations they're having, and then I just leave. And then, but it's very interesting that they keep engaging. Different communities are there. There's TED Clubhouse, then there's NFTs, Clubhouse, Mindfulness. They have a ritual where they do yoga with audios and sound systems. So there's a lot of things that have exploded there. So that's interesting. So I go there to see what sort of new rooms are coming there and going back to the old ones.
Yeah, very interesting. And, as we come close to the end of our conversation, I guess the question to ask is what do we want out of communities in the future? And it doesn't necessarily have to be just tech-enabled communities, but what are we looking for when we think of both tech-enabled, but also just cultural communities? What are our needs?
When I think about my community of my building, the building I live in, it's a community of artists. Everyone has their own flat, but I mean, we know each other. And what I really like about it is that I can count on them on ways that we cannot count on neighbors these days anymore. Like if I need something, if I need some help carrying things, and this is really nice, and it's becoming quite rare somehow to ask other people for help. And I think it would be nice to create spaces where it's okay to ask for help and to, in this sense, be vulnerable somehow, and not think that we are asking too much, because maybe it's because everyone feels so busy that we kind of feel that we cannot ask for anything because we are taking the most precious time out of the person. But if the community is created in a sense that helping other people feels good for everyone, this can change somehow.
Beautiful.
Yeah, to summarize what I look forward from the future of communities is that even if we can impact during the times of hard times, like whatever is happening in Ukraine, and coming together as communities, those types of communities would be very effective in bringing the impact for the societies. And individually, we can do not much, but we can do whatever we have in our spaces from our collectively nationalities. So maybe that sort of engagement and futuristic approach is there to be a bit hopeful from our part of the world and communities that are thriving. Maybe that thing is there.
Really nice.
Beautiful. So it's about giving back, is what I hear.
Yeah, I think for me, I look for conversation and conversations like these, not to like be cheesy about it or anything, but really the opportunity to have these kind of conversations and think about things a little bit differently. That's what I strive for in community. And being understood, right? And understanding and
You're looking for a bit of a safe space to have some serendipity, some inspiration, some surprises. I think you never know what you're going to get, and that's that part of the kind of enjoying. When you have quite a lot of structure and the expected from what you're going to get, and then to be able to go into a space where you're not sure what it is, but you should have a bit of that in your life as well, so you can have a bit of diverse perspective from different people in order to get something you wouldn't normally get. I think that's okay, as opposed to being more, as we have structured in our own communities, going to similar safer spaces where you have either an echo chamber or people who have similar backgrounds, and the world becomes more familiar so far as the people you work with and things you have an interest as you kind of get older. What is that kind of incidental learning is I think still very, very valuable. It's what's at the edges that you can then draw parallels and share your own experience and knowledge that might be useful, and I think that's okay too. So I think not everything has to be when it's so clearly defined. Sometimes it's okay to be looser, and in some spaces that's okay. In other places you need to be more purposeful. It's working out what do you get from each. Not necessarily it's always transactional, but knowing why you're going somewhere and being open-minded about what you're going to get out, and if anything at all.
yeah, that inspired me to think that I also like one of the challenges I have with engaging with communities digitally is authenticity and presence. Really making sure that the experience is honest and true and genuine. Not that you can ensure that in physical communities either, but just it's a lot easier to also be less present when you're engaging online. So I think that's really important for me.
Yeah. And one more thing that came to my mind was breaking the biases of how we perceive each other from different nationalities and different countries. Maybe communities online had made us become more accepting and more understanding of what other person's experiences are and how we can cultivate authentic conversation, as you said. So, yeah.
Guys, I have to dive out, but it's lovely to meet you all. And Michelle, good luck with your travels. Let me know when you're in Europe, and I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks so much for organising. It's really
thanks, Scott. And I think it's a good moment to wrap up. So thanks everyone for showing up today, for the conversation, and we'll see each other next month.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And don't forget, we're having one session on, or our next session in April on dimensionality, which is a little kind of more esoteric, but also more fun maybe. And some of the questions we'll be asking does technology challenge our perception of reality? And then also, obviously, we talked a little bit about VR and the metaverse, but what other dimensions can we access with technology? And finally, really going there, because many of the community have asked for it. What does technology mean about our experience of death? How does it influence, how does it impact our experience of death? So hope to see you there. And I think the link is in the chat, or no, not yet. We'll put it in there. And have a great month in the meantime, as you explore dimensions.
I'm not going to be able to dig up the link quickly here. I'm looking for it, but you'll find it in the same channel that you found this one. So either on the
Give
Envisioning
me a
Slack
minute.
or
I
the,
have it right here. 1 second.
thanks, Luma.
No worries. Eventbrite, here we go. Dimensionality. So see you all there.
Is it?
Speak to-
It hasn't shown up here.
Oh, it's in the chat.
You might have DM'd it. Oh no, there we go. There we go. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks. The
Alright.
chat button is tiny. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.